So hey, church, how you guys doing? Good. Oh, pretty good. Really good. Yeah, good. Good, awesome. Eh? We're going to be looking at 5,000 people for supper. No problem. No problem. That's Jesus. How many wives here ever had your husband do that? Maybe not 5,000 people, but say, hey, honey, I just came back from bowling. I brought the whole team. You have any nachos? You know, that kind of thing, right? Yeah, it could be kind of a stress-inducing situation. But Jesus has it handled, right? So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at the miracle of feeding 5,000 people, or 5,000 men. And then we also have the women and children as well added into that. So we're looking at that miracle. Now, there's an interesting thing about this miracle. We know we have the four Gospels, right? So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so in the four Gospels talk about Jesus. They talk about the ministry Jesus had while he was on earth, like, and in the death and the resurrection, and God's God. And so they go through the story of that, right? Now, in the Gospels, they vary a little bit from each other, right? Some Gospels, that's okay, it's okay. Some Gospels highlight different things than other Gospels do. And so the idea behind that is you have like four witnesses, right? You have four people writing about what took place from four different points of view. So it's kind of like 4D, if you think about it that way, right? So they got it from four different points of view. And so you get a much fuller picture of what took place. If you only have one witness, you only have one point of view, and that person might have missed what was going on this way or this way or this way. So that's why we have four Gospels, which is really cool. What's really cool about this, though, is that not all the Gospels cover everything. Like some Gospels don't have this part or that part. They kind of overlap and do things. But this miracle is in all four. All four Gospels cover this miracle. And there's only one other miracle that they all cover. You guys know what that is? The resurrection. Heard it over there. Maybe I'll heard it over here too. But yeah, the resurrection. Those are the only two miracles that all four Gospels cover. That makes me think that there's probably something substantial in this. That all four guys said, I need to mention this part. This was really something, right? And so all four cover this. So I think there's something significant in it. So let's take a look at it right now and see what it says. So we're going to look at Matthew 14, verses 13 to 21. One thing I find funny about this is when Rick was setting this up, when Rick and I were, I said, he goes, yeah, you're preaching on my favorite thing to preach on. Like one of my favorite passages of Scripture, you get. And I went, finally, I get the good one. You know, that was kind of fun. But the funny part is that he's going to be speaking on next week about the disciples going across the Sea of Galilee, right? You guys know that story. The storm comes up and Jesus, to me, that's my favorite one to preach on. So it kind of works out evenly here. So maybe we both are going to learn something by doing this. But so starting here, he says, now, when Jesus heard this, what did Jesus hear? When Jesus heard this, remember last week? When Jesus heard about John the Baptist, his cousin, right? When he heard that Herod had murdered his cousin, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. Now, remember how I said the Gospels have a different take on this? The different authors? So in this one, it says that he withdrew to a desolate place by himself. The other three Gospels have the disciples with him. That he withdrew, but he took the disciples with him when he went there. Now, does that mean that Matthew's wrong? No, not really. Matthew's just not including that part in it. He's saying that Jesus withdrew, but who did he withdraw from? He withdrew from the crowds around him, right? He withdrew from the ministry that was in front of him and doing all this ministry. Okay, I need to get away from this work for a moment. I need to withdraw. But he took his 12 with him. So, and we know he took his 12 with him because we read later on in Matthew as well. The 12 are there. It's not like he just left them on the other side of the lake and they were teleported over there or anything like that. So he must have taken them with him. So he withdrew. But the crowds heard it, and they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. So, in this first little section of this, we see that Jesus gets this really bad news about John. He withdraws, says, let's get away for a bit, guys. But the crowds hear about it. And they almost beat him to the other side. Like, that's quite the effort. But they get across before he gets across, and they meet him there. And then he has compassion on them. Now, I read this, and it actually, it gives me solace. It comforts me. And here's why it comforts me when I read this. I see Jesus feeling, like he's feeling stuff. He's feeling sorrow because his cousin has been beheaded. I think that's important. I mean, it's not a surprise that this happened. Jesus knows there's going to be persecution. Jesus knows there's going to be suffering. Jesus knows that people are not going to accept this message of the kingdom coming. He knows there's going to be a battle. He knows there's physical things that are going to take place. And he knows that people are going to get hurt. He knows that. Matter of fact, he tells us that, right? He says, they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. Right? He knows for himself that he's going to the cross, that he's going to lay down his life, that he's going to be tortured and hung on a cross. He knows that's going to take place. And he must have known that John the Baptist was not going to die a natural death. I'm pretty sure he knew that. I'm pretty sure this wasn't a surprise that this took place. But regardless of the fact that it wasn't a surprise, he still felt it. He still felt sorrow. And when he sees the crowd coming, he feels sorrow for them as well. Matter of fact, in some of the different translations, it says he felt sad for them because they were suffering. It says he healed them, right? He felt sad. That tells me this is a God who feels for us. We know in Scripture that Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So he's a great description of who the Father is. And so if Jesus has compassion for us, then we know that God the Father has compassion for us. And if Jesus feels for us, if he rejoices and is joyful when we are having a great time, then we know God the Father is rejoicing and having a great time when we're having a great time. And the same thing when we're going through hard times and things are not looking good and we've hurt ourselves or there's sorrow in our life, we can know that God has sorrow at the same time. That God is not just a logical being who put things together and says this to that goal, and then just sits back and doesn't care. We know that that's not the God we serve. Yes, things are set up. Yes, you are walking down this path. Yes, God knows these things are going to happen. But it's all for the greater glory at the end. But he still feels it along the way too. That he suffers along with us when we go through things. I go, that doesn't make the suffering pleasant. But it gives me solace in it. To know I'm not walking it alone. That there isn't just someone above who doesn't feel it saying, you're going to do this and I don't care. No, it's someone above saying, I'm walking you through this. I'm going to go with you. And I feel it too, son. I don't know why, that just makes me feel just so much better about it. That we have a God who truly cares about us. Now, the other thing I notice in this too is that he gets away. Now, who knows you need to get away sometimes? Well, you just need to get away, right? And so Jesus is getting away. He's saying, okay, guys, we need to get away from the ministry right now, the work we're doing. We need to get over here. Now, why is he doing that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, he's grieving. So when you grieve, that's a good time to kind of step back a bit, right? And go, let me just take stock of what's going on. I need to feel these emotions, right? So Jesus, I'm just going to take stock on this, you know? There's a grieving that takes place. So that's one part of it, and you need to do that. If you don't grieve properly when you have a loss, then that thing hangs on you for the rest of your life, right? It's important to grieve, and so he's doing that. But the other thing is this. He knows he needs a little bit of a rest. Who knows you need a little bit of rest when you've worked really hard? right? Right. I remember when we would have guys working and stuff, and you had your crew, and you'd be doing overtime, and I loved overtime because I'm getting paid like 1.5 times more than I was before. Like, that's pretty good. That's a good deal for me. Like, I love that, but I remember that after a certain period of time, the company was not getting a good deal after a while. Because we weren't going nearly as fast as anymore, right? Because there's a little, you start to wear down. So yeah, you do need some rest for sure. But there's another part of this getting away that's important. And may I explain it like this? What do you guys do when you go on a trip? Like, let's say you drive to Kamloops. Go to Calgary, but let's say you drive to Kamloops or someplace. You drive somewhere. And you get there, and you have a great time, and you drive back home again. What do you do when you get home? You do the dishes. No, that's not what I was going at, but good answer. Good answer. Obviously, you have a teenager at home, too. But anyways, no, when you get home, this is what I do. I go and I fill up my car. Now, why do I do that? Do I fill up my car because I was just on a trip? Partly, because I'm silly, okay. That might be true too. I fill up my car because I'm going to use it again. So I'm preparing it for the next trip. Does that make sense? Because if I'm not going to use the car again, what's the point of filling it up? It's just going to sit in the driveway with a full tank. Right? The reason why I do that is because I want it to be ready for when I use it again. So yes, I do fill it up because I was on a trip and because it is empty. But it's in preparation for what I'm going to do. The reason why I do it. And so when we rest, when we say, I need to spend time with God, I need to get away from this, I need to spend time with God. Why am I doing that? It's not so much because of what I've just done. Because God, hopefully I'm walking with God, and God has given me what I need to do what he just had me do. I'm spending time with him because I want to be prepared for the next thing he has in store for me. I want to make sure I'm walking with him, that I'm hearing him, that I'm following his directions, and that I'm full of God, if that's the way to say it. But I'm tanked up, right? I'm walking with him and I'm close with him in preparation for what he has in store next. I think that's what Jesus is going to do here. However, something happens. Something gets in the way. What gets in the way? God's will gets in the way. How many of you have said, man, I am at the end, I don't, and all of a sudden, boom, there's something there. It happens all the time, doesn't it? That's when we need to discern, is this your will, God? If it is, then I'm just going to dive into it. I'm going to trust you have everything I need. There's lots of times when you got a day off and then something happens and you go, okay, I need to go and do this stuff. Why? Because I feel God's leading in it. I know I'm going to trust he's going to give me what I need. Now, was Jesus negligent in taking rest? No, because he does this and he knows he's going to get rest, and he does that actually right after this miracle. He sends the disciples on their way and he goes up and spends time with God because he knows he needs that. But he also knows that what's in front of him right at that moment needs to be dealt with. And so he does. And so we hit verse 15. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is almost over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages to buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." I love that line. That's awesome. And they said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. And taking up the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. And so we hit this this passage of Scripture here, and there's a problem brewing. All four Gospels cover this. All of a sudden, there's an issue, and the issue is this. There's a lot of people there. Like, there's 5,000 people. You can imagine 5,000 people. But it's not 5,000 people. It's probably more like 10 or 12,000, right? Because we're not including the women and children in that number. And so there's like a lot of people. It's like, I would say 12,000 easily there. Maybe 10 or 12. Like, that's a lot of folks. And they're hungry. And why are they hungry? Because they didn't anticipate being there that long. Right? Like they've showed up. They haven't come with provisions to be there that long. And the disciples themselves, I mean, they're probably starved. And why are they starved? Because it goes back, I think it's in John, that prior to going across with Jesus, they were ministering so much, that so much was going on. It says the people were coming and going that the disciples didn't have time to even eat. So much earlier in the day, they were doing so much ministry, they didn't have time to eat anything then. And then they go across the lake, and then they're doing all this. So I'm sure the disciples are saying, we're really hungry, but it's these guys. That's what we're saying. These guys are really hungry. You know, like maybe they're, trying, maybe we get some food too, And they say, got to send them away. Now, like, have you guys ever been in a place where some guy just keeps talking and talking and talking? Like, he's got like this sermon, and he keeps going and going and going. Usually it's the second service, right? Keeps going and going. You're like, I'm getting really hungry. Will this guy knock it off? Like, this is good stuff, but man, like, not in this church, because Rick is so awesome and captivating. He's such a great guy who just tells stories and stuff that no one ever wants to leave. Okay, anyway, so have you guys ever been in that kind of thing? I'm almost thinking that sometimes when that happens, someone's going to stand up and do a Moses. Let my people go to Smitty's or someplace. Let them go, let them get something to eat, right? Because you're getting hungry because it's hard. Well, this is what's happening here. Like, these folks are getting hungry, and the disciples are saying, we got to send them away. Now, why are they saying that? Well, even if you could buy food for them, let's say the disciples had enough that they could pay for a meal for everyone who's there. It's a desolate place. There are some villages around, but nothing that can handle 10 or 12,000 people showing up. No McDonald's, right? Like that many people, if they went into the local villages to get something to eat, they would strip the place bare. And so the disciples are saying, these guys have got to take a trip. Like, they got to really go some distance. Let them go so they can get something to eat. And Jesus says, I love it. He says, they don't need to go anywhere. You feed them. Okay. How's that going to work, God? How's that going to work, Jesus? How are we going to feed them? We just told you they don't have anything. How are we possibly going to do this? Like, how is that possibly going to work? And Jesus says, what do you have with you? See, the disciples are kind of shook, right? Jesus gives them command, you feed them. Has God ever given you something to do? Has he ever poked you a little bit? Says, hey, why don't you go do this? Why don't you do that? You just kind of get this little thing inside of you. And usually what do we say when we get that little nudge from God? That wasn't God. That must have been me. I must have thought that I should go do something ridiculous. Well, I'll go a little tip for you. How often do you think of doing something ridiculous? Okay, never, you guys don't answer because you guys do it all the time. But how many of you guys think of doing something ridiculous? Like this is not something I want to do, not something I'd like to do, but all of a sudden I get this idea I should do it. Do you really think that's your imagination doing that? It's God doing that, right? But how many times have you felt that, and that just seems so overwhelming? That's not possible. That's impossible. That is so overwhelming, I can't possibly see myself being able to do that. And that's where the disciples are with this. Jesus says, why don't you feed them? And they're overwhelmed. I can't see around this, God. I can't see how you've just given me a task that's impossible to do. How are we possibly going to do this? And what does Jesus say to him? He says, what's in your hands, basically? What do you have? What do you have? And so the answer, they say, we got five small loaves and 2 fish. That could probably work, right? We got that's what we got. We got five small loaves and 2 fish. And you know what, here's the craziest thing about that. They didn't even have 5 loaves and 2 fish. They stole it from some poor kid who happened to be walking through with his lunch. It actually belonged to him. We read that in John. It's like in John it says that they oh, look over here, this kid's got 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? That's what they basically did. Your kid, we need this for some reason, and they gave it to Jesus. And Jesus goes, oh, no problem. Awesome. That's exactly what we need. 5 small loaves, that'll work just perfectly. I got an experiment for you. We did this last night. These are really good, by the way, just so you know. And remember, last night the people blew this, okay? Eat till you're satisfied. Okay, anyways. We got a bunch of loaves here. Here, check it. There we go. Gary. Yeah, take some that you want. Like, tear up some that you want there. Pick up some, yep. Yep, there we go. And, oh, there we are. There we go. Oh, right to the back. There we go. Okay. Okay, now take it so you're satisfied. Have some so you're satisfied. It shouldn't take too long. Go ahead. Everybody having some? What? Okay. No, you're hungry. You're in the desert. Take some of your satisfied. You go, oh, no, I won't. Thank you very much. I'm good. No, you wouldn't do that in the desert. Come on. You say you take it out. So how's this going? How's this going? Are we getting everybody? Is everybody getting some? It's already left. You're not satisfied, are you? See, that's what happened last night, too. We had 40 people, and we gave out 5 loaves, and everybody thought they were very Canadian. They all went, well, there's so many people. I'll take a little tiny bit off this. And so we actually did have some left over, but it wasn't a miracle. It's because no one followed the instructions that we had some left over. So here's the thing. What I'm trying to get across here, the loaves the things I gave out to you guys, that's about the same size as what the boy had. He didn't have a big loaf of bread like this. Those little barley loaves are about that big. They're tiny. And I know I didn't hand out fish because that would have been gross, you guys pulling fish apart, okay? But here's the point. I can't possibly feed you guys with 5 of those so you're satisfied. It is impossible. And there's only about maybe 150 people in this room. Not 5,000. It's completely impossible to do that. But Jesus says, it's no sweat for me. He says, what do you have in your hands? We have this. He says, okay, let's start with what you have in your hands. And Jesus takes it, and he makes it so much more, so much bigger. What do you have? You have this. Okay, that's exactly what we need. No, it's not, Jesus. You can't do math. No, it's exactly what we need. Trust me on this. Start handing it out. And not only does everybody end up satisfied, like they're full, like you're not, because you were being polite, you only took a little bit. Not only is everybody satisfied, they have 12 baskets left over of the pieces that are on the ground. Like they went around and picked up everything. People are so satisfied they didn't finish what they had. Because God's so good with that. He says, what do you have in your hands? We see that in other parts of Scripture too. 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 to 7. And now, excuse me, and now the wife of one of the sons, now the wife of the sons of the prophets cried to Elijah, your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant feared the Lord, but the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves. So she's really in debt, right? Like her husband was so in debt that when he died, the creditor comes and says, okay, your 2 sons now belong to me. That's how in debt she was. And Elijah said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me what you have in the house. In other words, tell me what you have in your hand. What do you have in your hands? What do you have that God can use? What do you have? And she said, your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil. That's it. I have nothing in the house but a jar of oil. And he said, go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels, and not too few. Then go in and shut the door behind yourself and your sons, and pour into all these vessels. And when one is full, set it aside. So she went from him and shut the door behind herself and her sons. And as she poured, they brought the vessels to her. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another. Then the oil stopped flowing. She came and told the man of God, and he said, go sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on the rest. He says, what do you have? What's in your hand? Let's get this little jar of oil. Okay, start pouring it into these big vats. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? You just do this and it's done. But it just keeps coming out. I don't know how you can explain that. You can't explain that. It makes no rational sense at all, but it just keeps coming out. I'm sure she's like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going to stop. And it's enough that it pays off all that she owes, but not just that. There's enough left over that her and her sons can live off the rest. That's God. That's God saying, what do you have in your hands right now that I'm going to use for you? That you're going to be blown away with? In 1 Kings 17, verse 8 to 16, we see something similar. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Arise. This is Elijah, not Elisha this time. Arise and go to Zarephath. And that's the way we're going to pronounce it today. Okay, Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there, gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. Now, a little backstory behind this. Elijah has called a drought on the area. Okay, he's fed up with the king and with his wife, and he's called a drought because of all their pagan worship. And says, okay, I got to teach you a lesson. There's going to be a drought. And so he calls that. So here's the thing. He's the reason there's a drought. So keep that in mind. Because he's the one who kind of proclaimed it, right? And he did it mainly because of, what was the king's name? Pardon me? Ahab, yeah. Oh, pardon? Pardon? Yes, Ahab. Ahab? Ahaz. Yeah, Ahaz, sorry. But his wife was Jezebel, right? Guess where Jezebel came from? That country. Zarephath. That's where she came from. So not only is he the one who called the drought, he's actually gone to her hometown, more or less. And he's telling a widow, hey, go get me some water. That is bold. Yeah, it is bold. They don't have any water. It's a drought. Like, the water's pretty scarce. He says, go get me some water. Go get me the very thing that is scarce right now and give it to me, right? Give me some water that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. Like, he doesn't know when to stop. Also get me some food, right? And she says, I love this, as the Lord, not as the Lord the God, right? As the Lord your God lives. Can you hear it in her voice? Yeah. You turkey, you jerk. All this is because of you and your God. But she continues on, right? As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat and die. Now, she's not exaggerating. This is all they have left. This is going to be the last meal. They're not going to die that day, but this is going to be the last meal they have before, right? They may eat and die. And Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go and do as you have said. But first make a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterwards make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be emptied, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said. And she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. She listens to him and she does what he says. She takes the very last that she has. What do you have? What do you have in your hands? A little bit of flour, a little bit of oil. Okay, use it for this purpose, and let's see what God does. And she makes it. And here's the thing. She's not even a believer. She's not even a follower. But God cares enough about her, and he cares enough about his glory being known that he does this miracle anyways. And it doesn't run out. She takes that step. She could have just made it for herself and her son and eaten it and said, well, that's the end of everything. But instead, she gives it to God. And God makes something amazing happen. He says, what's in your hands? What do you have? Kind of last thing I want to look at in the Old Testament is Moses. Moses is given a hard task, and we know about this. He's out in the wilderness being a good shepherd, and he comes across a burning bush, and it's actually God, and says, I got a plan for you. You're going to Egypt. And Moses is like, I'm not going to Egypt. Yes, you're going to Egypt, and you're going to go and rescue all my people, and you're going to lead them out, and then through the desert, and then to the promised land. And Moses is like, okay, I just came to look at a bush. I don't know what's going on here. I am not that guy. It's overwhelming for him, right? This whole thing is overwhelming for him. He tries to get out of it. And so he says here in 4, verse 1, then Moses answered, behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. He's trying to get out of it. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it. I always find that really funny, but that's just me maybe. But, I get that. I go, I'm almost thinking, sometimes God gives you something. He says, what do you have in your hand? I got a staff. I actually have a staff. He goes, throw it on the ground. And so he does. I'm not going to do that because I'll scare some people. But if it turns into a snake, you're going to be scared. So I don't know. But he throws it on the ground, and it becomes a serpent. You know, sometimes God gives you something amazing. He says, what do you have in your hand? I got this. And then the miracle he does, it is so overwhelming, it actually scares you. I don't know if I want to be a part of this. This is too much. Have you ever felt God to be overwhelming? I hope you have. In a good way. He is just that good and that amazing. And so he throws it on the ground, it becomes a snake, and he runs from it. I just always think that's kind of cool. And it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. Right. I'm already scared of this thing. I'm actually going to go catch it? That's crazy. But if I'm going to catch it anywhere, I'm grabbing, yeah, okay, the tail is probably this. I don't know if it's the safest place to grab it or not, because it might turn around and bite me. But it's the farthest way from the mouth, so okay. But he grabs it from the tail. And so he put his hand on it and caught it, and it became his staff in his hand. That they may believe that the Lord of God, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. What an amazing thing. What's in your hand? He has a staff. I'm betting Moses never looked at that staff the same way again. I'm betting, they say, what's with Moses? Why does he walk like that? He's probably walking like this all the time everywhere he goes. He's keeping it as far away as possible because this thing has a habit of doing strange things, right? Turns into snakes. Like, I'd be doing that. I was like, yeah, the staff's important, but I'm not getting, when he goes to bed, I'm sure he's putting it in a box, putting a rope around the box and putting a big rock on the box, before he goes to bed because that snake's not getting out of there. Like, it's crazy things. But here's the thing. God uses what you have in your hand, and he doesn't tell you how it's going to work out sometimes. He surprises you. He surprises you with what he has in store for you and what you have in your hand. How many of you have had dreams? Dreams. Not just going to bed and sleeping at night dreams, although those are really cool, and sometimes they're really quite telling, but ideas and thoughts. Things you go, I want to be this someday. This is something I want to do. This is something maybe I want to try. When I was younger, and I spoke on this last month when I spoke a little bit about it, but when I was younger, the first time I understood there was a God, I was about 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, somewhere around there. And I understood there was a God, and I came to the Lord, if you remember that, mainly out of fear of demons more than a love for God. And I realized that he was safer than what I had just seen. And so I wanted him instead because he was bigger. And I started thinking to myself, maybe I should be a priest or a pastor or a preacher. That might be kind of cool. And I started thinking those thoughts because I'd been to those church services and I'd seen that the preacher seemed to be the guy that had everything going on. And so if I'm going to be anyone, I want to be him. Right? I started to have those thoughts. And as a 10-year-old trying to work it out. Now, it didn't last very long because I did fall away. And I mentioned that before. But as I had those thoughts, we had a grandparent that lived with us. Now, I had my grandma and grandpa who were saved, and they were strong believers. They're the ones who took me to the camps and stuff like that. So they were the only believers in my entire family, though. So I had my grandma and grandpa there. But I also had another grandma who lived with us. And she wasn't a very happy person in a lot of ways. And I probably didn't help that as well, being a young guy. And I remember, I got in trouble doing something, messing around. And I remember her saying to me, someone like you will never be a pastor because of that stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever, right? I get, as a 10-year, I wasn't the greatest kid, but whatever. Well, I didn't realize how much that affected me until I was in my 30s. And God started nudging us towards that again. You know what? I think God actually gave me that dream when I was 10, that desire. And I would say in a room of this size, matter of fact, I say if you're in a room of maybe 5 people, there's people in that room who had a dream at one time about something in their life, and they've lost it. It never happened. See, life just rolls on. Things happen. We go through school, we meet someone, we get married, and we have a great life, and we do all those cool things. We fall into the job that's at hand, and we do that job. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. It's good. It's good to be married. It's good to have a family. It's good to have employment. If you don't have employment, you should have employment. That kind of thing. Like, it's good, for sure. But the constant thing of life keeps rolling. And we miss the dream. We miss the things that God had in store for us. And we say, when we see that dream again, I can't do that. I can't do that, Lord. That's just too hard. Those things you told me before, how do I do that now? How do I make that happen now? Life is just so complicated now. Or something comes up in your life and you say, I think God's telling me to do this, but how am I possibly going to do this? It's just too overwhelming. And I hear the Lord saying, What's in your hand? What do you have? I don't have much. Okay, but what do you have? Well, I've got this. Okay, will you give that to me? Will you allow me to work through that thing that you have and have something amazing take place? I can hear the Lord saying that. I've heard him say it in my life many times. And it's a matter of stepping out and saying, okay, I'll try this. Let's give this a go and see what happens. And let's see what happens. Because God's amazing. And you say, well, what if it's a mistake? What if God says I'm supposed to get a guitar and sing outside of Tim Hortons? I don't think he's telling you that. But let's say God said that. If you do that, don't say you're from here. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. That'd be good. If God tells you to do it, then yes, do that and do say you're from here, okay? Like seriously. But let's say God says to do that, and I do that, and it's not God, and it doesn't work out, and they throw donuts at me. Well, that's okay. You get donuts, so that's all right. But what happened? Well, you know what? Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we step out and we do something, but it was actually just us thinking that. I don't think God goes, oh, I can't believe it. I think God goes, awesome. Way to go. Yeah, you got it wrong. But I love the heart that you went out and did something and you risked, not knowing if it was right or wrong, but you went out and you risked. That's an act of worship to God. That willingness to step out and be embarrassed, that willingness to step out for a loss, that willingness to do something for God even though you don't know how it's going to work out. God takes that as an act of worship. He says, thank you for that. He enjoys that. But here's the other part of it. What if you're right? It's amazing. And God says, thank you for that little loaf. Let's feed 10,000 people with that. Let's do something amazing together. I'm so glad you're willing to step out and try. And we step out and try. I ask the team to come up here. As we get into the next song, if you've had something that God birthed in you, maybe it was when you were a child, maybe it was when you were a teenager, maybe it was yesterday. If God burst something in you and you said, that's impossible, I cannot make it happen, well, then you're in a great spot. Because it's not about you making it happen at all. It's about you taking that small little thing that you have and saying, Lord, I'm going to give it to you and I'm going to step out and try. And see where it goes. Trust that he's God. Trust that he has this desire to do amazing things through you. Not that you're not to puff you up and make you a star, but so that he's glorified and so that people come to know him. So as we do this song, I want you to just kind of reflect on that a little bit as we sing this next worship song here.